Welcome, everyone. And with that, Mia, you're ready to get started.
I am. I'm just sending a quick message to somebody here in the chat. Thank you. All right, so here we go. Here's our agenda for the day, and this is just a list of things we're going to talk about. So, just run through it. We'll talk about the SAVE Act, the security breach, some stuff going on at SCOTUS, our ranked choice voting bill, Article 5, that's a big thing. So Sunshine Law relating to body cams, thank you letters, and April 5th. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine. I'm going to ask everybody to mute. I'm going to mute my right now. And that is great. And more folks joining. Okay, Catherine.
Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad we're here for Coffee with Common Cause. It's good to see people from all over Ohio. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop into the chat a document that has links to materials that we're talking about today. So as opposed to doing links kind of throughout, we're a smaller team today. Kelly is on the road and is in Toledo today. And so I thought, hey, let's do a doc where you have everything together. And what we'll do is we'll pop it in every once in a while. I know sometimes you get booted off and you come back in. We want to make sure that you have that. I also wanted to highlight, beyond the welcome, is that we'll be sharing kind of follow-up materials so that you have that. So Mia went kind of through the agenda. So the first thing I thought that we should talk about is about the SAVE Act. Looks like the SAVE Act will actually have hearings. Things are moving in Congress next week. And so, this is the kind of thing that as we think about the different kind of proposals that are out there that are really problematic, it's important to think about, the impact on voting. And, as many of us will say, that voting is in fact, the right that makes all other rights possible. And it doesn't seem unreasonable, to create some tightening to ensure that people are who they say they are, except, for example, I am a woman that uses my married name. My maiden name was Enki. I am now a tercer. It becomes more complicated for me to vote because, of course, my birth certificate doesn't prove who I am. It doesn't actually provide, eligibility. They have not made modifications for that. It's possible that they will, but it's just, we're talking about, 69 million women who use their married names. The other thing to think about is the impact on boards of elections. That in fact, with boards of elections, they will have to do all of the voter registration, meaning that they will have to check ID. They will be completely responsible. And so for many of us that have for many years done, voter registration, and whether it was, at a community park or at a college campus or at a high school, that will no longer be possible under the SAVE Act. Only folks who are election officials would be able to register folks. And, we know that this could have a really significant impact. For many folks, they just don't have easy access to their documents. So like that whole, 13% of Americans don't have ready access to birth certificates, which is a lot of voters. It's just an incredible number of voters. So chiseling away at access to the polls. Also to remember, so many of us move, and especially people with less money and are young, they just move frequently. And so it's not just the registering that it would be necessary to go to the Board of Elections to do in person. It would also be when you moved, you would have to re-register in person. So there are very serious impacts of this. Mia, if you're willing to move us along. I'm going to encourage you to make a phone call today. So this is to call your U.S. rep. So this is your member of Congress to actually talk to them about why it is that you're worried about the SAVE Act, and that's HR 22. And so I included a few talking points. They're also in the docs, and they'll be included in follow-up information. But I think it's important to provide some basic reasons why you're worried about it. You don't have to, provide all of them. I think it's one of the things that is clear is, the 60 million women their birth certificates don't match their current name is a really salient one for people. Focusing on low income households, and then just focusing on just the real challenge when there's absolutely no reason. We do
Right.
not, in fact, have a problem with people who are immigrants voting in Ohio elections. And so, focusing on, hey, instead of solving a real problem, it would end voter registration drives. It would end some of the civic community events that so many of us do. And so with that, Mia, are there things you'd like to say about the SAVE Act?
Yeah, I think just, to emphasize the burden on the Board of Elections, and, they're already stretched and have a lot of, things that they need to do. This just adds a burden on them. It also gives them some kind of civil liability. If they do something wrong, then they could end up being, sued or whatever. So that's seems wrong. And the other thing is just, this is really nefarious. The purpose of this is to shrink the size of the U.S. electorate. That the purpose is not to protect elections, because if they wanted to protect elections, they would go to elections officials and say, "What do you need?" And this is not what elections officials would say. I think that the scripts and the talking points that Catherine gave are really helpful. Making a call should be easy, and much appreciated. So,
I also think, you may say to yourself, oh, my rep I don't need to do that because my rep is fine. One of the things that we do know is that it can make a difference for folks that are just on the fence. So for example, the reason that Kelly Dufour, who is our voting and elections manager, isn't here today is she is in Toledo and delivering petitions, meaning those that folks signed, to Marcy Kaptur's office. So, whether your rep is a Democrat or a Republican, it's important to make a phone call, to address this. And I also think, the fact that Real ID is not going to be enough to ensure who you are and to ensure you can register to vote is a real obstacle.
it also gets rid of online registration. So anything that isn't in person at the Board of Elections is out. And that's huge. I mean, I know a lot of people on this call do a lot of voter registration. And it impacts us.
And Ari, we're going to add your article into the document that has all of the different resource links. And we'll add that for the follow-up that you'll receive later today.
Catherine, I think you were going to also mention this.
Oh, okay. So it's so fun. And one of the things that's always a challenge is who's going to cover what. So one of the things that I don't know how I keep being surprised by Trump, but there is literally something that okay, I'm going to do an executive order about voting. And yet, of course, the times, manner, all of the basically how, elections are done is decided by state legislatures with, some laws that are passed by Congress. It's literally in Article 1, Section 4 of the US Constitution. And in fact, President Trump, day before yesterday, actually did an executive order about voting. And I mean, if you're willing to go kind of to the next slide, I think the thing that really makes it challenging really has to do with the executive order that is the parts that are most challenging really have to do with voting by mail and documentary proof of citizenship that is similar to the SAVE Act. And that whole notion of, oh, we're going to tell the states exactly how they're going to do elections, and that the executive order is supposed to go into effect in a month, giving boards of elections, secretary of states, if they were to follow this, there's no time. And we have, a May 6th, we have a May 6th election. So clearly this is not constitutional. It is going to be challenged. It's clearly not appropriate, but it adds to people thinking that that our elections are under attack from immigrants. It suggests that our voting system isn't safe. And there are important elections that are happening this spring. Wisconsin is very close by. April 1st is the day that their Supreme Court actually had the election for Supreme Court is there. So it just it does this thing where, one, it makes us all anxious because we just do not have any idea exactly what he'll do next. But then it does mean that all sorts of energy needs to be spent fighting back on something that's clearly unconstitutional. And I had a conversation with a reporter yesterday who said, well, what about state legislatures that want to do what Trump says? That an executive order has power if the state legislature that determines the direction of the elections decide they have power. And so we shouldn't be overly worried, but this is the kind of thing that just makes things more confusing and is such a power grab and suggests that Trump is doing everything he can to expand the power of the presidency. Mia, anything you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to say that it's all part of bolstering this narrative that is a false narrative. And I'm going to look for it. I don't have it to hand, but at some point in the past, I found this amazing article with a bunch of graphs that showed the changes over time in voting and election laws in the US. And, now we have in Ohio strict voter ID, and we're talking about proof of citizenship. But not that long ago, no ID at all was required to go in and vote. People just went in, their name was on the register, and they signed their name. That was in all the states. There was no such thing as voter ID, and it's gradually, incrementally gets harder and harder and harder. So, and it's in order to counter what? In order to counter something that's not there. So I think it's important for us to keep that in mind. So. And if it's okay, we'll move ahead to the next topic. Again, crazy, crazy, crazy things going on in the Trump administration. This Signal chat security breach. And we just wanted to bring this up with you because it is such a really shocking thing. And the part that we care about from the Common Cause Ohio perspective is that these messages were being, the conversation was going on an app which has a feature that all of the messages disappear after a period of time. You can set the period of time that they disappear. And so this is absolutely specifically in order to avoid the Freedom of Information Act, in order to avoid the record keeping laws that we as the people have to be able to see a record at some point in time of what our government, was doing. And so I included a link to an article from The Guardian. It's actually specified in Project 2025, it recommends that the government begin to do its business on private apps that disappear in order to evade record-keeping laws. And so this is just, this is just another shocking development, things that we just didn't think could ever happen that are in fact happening. I just watched a little TikTok of Pete Buttigieg going off on what happened as a Navy intelligence officer for 7 years. And, you know, it's impossible to overstate what an incredibly significant screw up this was. And so, and thank you, Bill. I see people putting things in the chat here, which we will, look at. But from an information preserving perspective, this is really shocking. And with that, I'm gonna pass it back to Catherine.
Well, I think we've all been watching the US Supreme Court pretty closely. Certainly that by giving President Trump kind of free rein because of his power to avoid laws during his presidency. He went into this year knowing that he could do all sorts of things and would not be found to be legally accountable for whatever he did. On the other hand, Chief John Roberts recently came out when Trump was talking about wanting to impeach a judge who ruled against him in an immigration case. This was a judge who had been initially appointed by George H.W. Bush. And, it was a very reasonable decision following immigration law. Trump has been calling for him to be impeached. And John Roberts really made a statement kind of pushing back on the impeachment. The other thing that happened recently with the US Supreme Court was they decided not to relitigate the New York Times v. Sullivan case from 1964 that ensures that we have freedom of the press. Yes, we have the Bill of Rights, but this says, hey, when you're talking about a public person, that as long as you're not doing it with malice, and you're providing information, that you cannot actually be sued for your newspaper articles. And so this was, an important decision where they just were like, okay, we're just not, sometimes when they don't do something, it's as important as when they do something. Mia, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just reading a little bit about NYT v. Sullivan, and it really basically, before this ruling, the press and libel law had not come under the First Amendment, and because that was considered the states, in the sphere of the states, and so it was a really momentous decision, which. And what's interesting about it is this happened during the civil rights struggle, and the awards against the New York Times actually have shut it down, and there were libel cases from southern states against TV stations. So the TV stations had just started to come into the South to show the civil rights, the sit-ins and what was going on in Alabama and Mississippi. And the response from the Southern governors was to try to shut down and to make those news outlets leave the South and just let Jim Crow and all of that just continue as it had for so long. And so this case turned that around. And so this was really a big deal. And so the attempt to kind of go backwards on that would have really radically altered our, the press is willing. I mean, the press is way too shy as it is, but it would have made it much, much worse. So this was a kind of a significant thing.
Well, and I noticed Dottie mentioned that the Ohio Bar Association has not stepped up in a meaningful way. What I've had a couple different conversations with lawyers who are organizing. They're organizing other lawyers in Ohio against authoritarianism. And then there are also a national kind of fair courts work. Where there's a lot of activity going on. The new Ohioans Against Extremism has been spending time organizing lawyers, organizing folks who can push back. One of the things that what is very clear is we need to have as many people as possible pushing back against these kinds of attacks on the courts, on our freedom of speech. We are living in really weird times, weird and
Yeah.
dangerous times.
Next fun topic. Weird and dangerous and un-American. America, it's about freedom and our rights and our ability to speak our minds without fear, etc. Senate Bill 63 is really an odd thing. It's sponsored by Teresa Gavarone and Bill DeMora, one Republican and one Democrat. And what it does is it prohibits ranked choice voting, denies funding to local governments if they decide to use ranked choice voting. And the thing about it is, why? Why? If a municipality or some other entity wants to experiment and try to make their voting system better with ranked choice voting, why not let them? Now, there may be technical challenges, and we very much respect the Board of Elections. If the Board of Elections says we can't do it right now, let's work together and see, to figure out how it can be done. But this has been done successfully in other states, other cities, other municipalities, and very successfully, and it has many benefits. Ranked choice voting leads, because people need not only a first choice vote, but a second or a third choice vote. It fights that hyper partisanism. It fights negative campaigning, and it makes everybody feel that they can vote for the person that they really want, as opposed to the lesser of two evils, or the one that they feel is just, their vote is thrown away because they are more likely, the person they really want is just never doesn't have a chance of winning. And so it just really is offensive in a state that has home rule, that in the state capital, they could sit and say, you're not allowed to even try this. And it's also another one of those cases where it seems more and more you go to the state house and there's 4 lobbyists that are proponents of something, and there's 100 citizens that are opponents, and then in the hearing they pass it anyway. It is frustrating. It is frustrating. But there was some great testimony. I went and sat there and listened, and I felt that I learned a lot, and there were people there that knew a lot about ranked choice voting, a lot more than the people on the committee, who said all kinds of absolutely verifiably false things about ranked choice voting, and tried to intimidate witnesses, etc. But that has not had a vote yet. So definitely get in touch with your senators, and at the point that it comes up for a vote, definitely ask them to vote no on Senate Bill 63. There's no point in prohibiting ranked choice vote if a municipality or other entity wants to do. Bill DeMora, yes, call Bill DeMora. Call him every day. He has kind of really dug himself in on this. He really, and the things the things he was saying were, very he doesn't, he and I got into a little argument there. Well, I tell you, he is being pretty stubborn about this ranked choice voting thing. So I think it definitely is important to to try to contact him. What are your thoughts, Catherine?
Yeah, I actually think that it's worth telling someone who's sponsoring the bill that you have concerns about it. Also, it's a bill prohibiting an idea. You understand where I'm getting at? There's something about, like, you can't even explore this idea, this new way, different way of doing elections. And, it just seems kind of ludicrous. He is very concerned about, the cost and all of the details of it, but no community is going to implement ranked choice voting without serious conversations, considerations, a vote of the people. There's an implementation period. I think it's worth kindly reminding Bill Demora that there our representative democracy doesn't always work so well, and that ranked choice voting is one of the ways that we know that we can ensure that people's voices are truly heard.
All right, next topic. I think Catherine has an important one to talk about.
So I woke up this morning and, I'm not necessarily a morning person. And I first thing I did is I went outside, and there was the dispatch that was on my front steps. And it's about the US Constitution changes. Ohio GOP pushes for convention of states seeking curb on federal spending and term limits for lawmakers. Now, I think it's important really to start with, like, when we think about an Article 5 convention, well, what are we actually talking about, and what is in the US Constitution? And Article 5 is very short. There are really no parameters on what a constitutional convention should be. It's just this, 2/3 of the states call for it, you get the convention. One of the things that folks that are pushing for a convention of states will say is, oh, what we're doing is we're pushing for this because we want to rein in federal spending. We want to address term limits. I wanted to highlight, and Mia, you can even move to the next slide. I wanted to highlight that when Rick Santorum, former US Senator Rick Santorum, came to testify in favor of legislation to have a constitutional convention, he started talking about how his concerns about the 17th Amendment. And, most of us, 17th Amendment. 17th Amendment is the direct election of US senators. So he was identifying that as problematic. And so even though they're talking about, hey, term limits for members of Congress, and they're talking about, hey, we should do something to rein in federal spending. Once you get into the US Constitution, the entire thing is about the federal government and could be clearly, clearly you could get into any area. And it's just incredibly scary at this time period to be thinking about getting into the US Constitution. So, earlier in the month, the Plain Dealer, Cleveland.com had their, columnist advice people, people that were part of their editorial board, provide an overview of, like, what they thought. And as you might imagine, there was genuine horror. Yeah, there was genuine horror that in fact that in fact we would actually open up the US Constitution. Now, as you all know, it is hard to amend the US Constitution. Some of you, ERA is still not part of the US Constitution, for example. It's very slow, it's very hard, but there are ways to actually do it. If you'll move to the next slide. The one thing I would say is that there are 19 states who have called for a convention of states using, the same language, which is problematic because all you need is 34. And then I just wanted to highlight Mark Meckler, who started the Convention of States. They said this is intended to reverse 115 years of progressivism. And we say, yes, it is. And in fact, when people came and they testified, about, about wanting this, they talked about really supporting the work of Doge. They talked a lot about wanting to make sure that we cut, Social Security, Medicare, what just it's just
Department of
very
Education.
problematic. Now, there are a couple paths for this. There's the House and the Senate, and at the end of this, we'll be sending you a follow-up email that'll have all of this information. We'll try to collect some information from the chat so that you have that as well. The hearings that we've had so far are the hearing was House Joint Resolution 2. It was very detailed. There was a lot of pushback. What was interesting is the folks that are worried about the Second Amendment, they also are pushing back. So as we think about, this isn't a left issue or a right issue, it's concerns about making sure that we protect the Constitution. One of the things that is kind of funny is so many state legislators hate term limits. So it's interesting that they want to impose term limits on others and possibly themselves if they get elected to Congress. And then if you will move to the next slide, there's also legislation in the Senate. Mia, was that something you wanted to add?
Well, no, I just wanted to ask you, so where are how they've had a hearing, or where are they at in the process?
Okay, all right. So House Joint Resolution 2 has had one hearing. So that's the sponsor testimony. And I was going to say, Rep. McLean provided information suggesting, like in his testimony, he said, hey, you're going to hear from legal experts for the next couple months. And so it did sound like this is on the agenda. They're taking it very seriously, but it's not moving quickly in the House.
And then there's
in
the Senate version.
The Senate, there have been a couple hearings. So there have been 2 hearings, and we're waiting. So there was the sponsor testimony. There was the proponent testimony, which was completely filled. So lots and lots of Convention of State advocates, basically, going through suggesting that a Convention of States was necessary to rein in federal spending. And this is the one where I said Rick Santorum was the person who actually testified talking about the 17th Amendment. Now, Mia, if you move to the next slide, what's interesting about that is that House Bill 67 actually says, hey, if you're going to be a delegate for Ohio, the delegates for Ohio have to protect these amendments. Does not include the 17th Amendment. Now, of course, Ohioans can't necessarily determine what delegates from other states choose to do. And ultimately, it's pretty hard to hold folks accountable when they choose to get together for a constitutional convention. In fact, the one in 1787 was how can I say this? They completely got rid of everything. They redrew the Constitution. It's the only constitutional conventions that we had, and states did tell the delegates to go there and only amend only make amendments, not to do of the Articles of Confederation, not to do a whole rewrite, and they did a whole rewrite. So they are pushing back, trying to suggest, hey, we would only let them look at these specific ones. They're not going to take women's right to vote away, for example. but they seem to be okay with not protecting direct election of US senators. And then the
And
next,
Catherine,
yes.
remind us how many, again, one more time, how many states are needed to make this happen and how many, what the count is right now?
Okay, so of language that is the same, that's the convention of state language, there are 19 states that have actually called for a convention. There are 34 states that are required. And so we are actually fairly close. And it is the kind of thing that, yes, across the country we held the line pretty well, but last year, but this could be a year where they just make some significant movement. One of the things that we know that's different about this year, because the convention of states things is I feel like it's introduced every 2 years, so every general assembly, and I feel like it's been 10 years. I mean, it might be 8 years. It's been one of those where it's just, they do it. There's, a little like, hey, this is a great idea. And there's only one or two hearings. It is not a big deal. I think what does make this difference is the Convention of States is very well funded right now. And so, like Rick Santorum making a trip to the Ohio State House, they are spending time and energy on organizing folks to push for a convention of states across the country.
Ay, ay, ay.
So I mentioned, the House Bill 67. There's a companion Senate Bill 112. Basically, they give the ways that people will become delegates, because of course Article 5 doesn't have a lot of details. What is problematic about those bills is that they say, hey, it should be an odd number of people. So, okay, 1, 3, odd number of people. But it also doesn't give any sense of, well, the appointment process only includes the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. And then they get confirmed by both chambers. But both chambers are, dominated by the GOP. There's no sense that, there should be an appointment process where they look at a bunch of folks, they look at some diversity, they have a thoughtful process. It just seems like very pro forma. And so, one, how do you hold these delegates accountable? But two, who are they sending essentially to be the next founding fathers? It's actually genuinely scary. So I do encourage you, to take action and say no to an Article 5 convention. Right now, we're focusing, this action really focuses on the Ohio Senate. We're going to be expanding that to the Ohio House as well. The Senate just seemed to be moving faster.
So no provision whatsoever to require any bipartisanship or balance. So you could end up with a delegation from Ohio that's picked by Matt Huffman and endorsed by the supermajority. And, that's the end of that. To rewrite our Constitution. Okay.
And Jan was suggesting we come up with a script. It is complicated, and yet it's not. At the end of the day, we don't know what would happen with a convention of the states, and we'll be sure in our follow-up to include some just really, really good talking points. And complexity shouldn't get in the way of us taking action. They want us to stay confused.
I can't click on it now because it'll make the slide go away, but I'm pretty sure that this action here probably has a script on it. Or if it's an email letter, then it has, a short statement, but we will make sure that we send something as well. But as Catherine said, it's just, protect the Constitution. Now is not the time to do this an action where with no rules and no limits as to what could be changed. All right.
I was going to say, I also thought that the Plain Dealer editorial board conversation was actually really useful because it was the way that they talked about it helped me think more clearly about why we should fight an Article 5 convention.
And I think there's an op-ed from the Inquirer that that I wrote that we probably can put in there too that has some basic ideas. But yeah, so scripts are always really helpful and important, and we will make sure to send one. Okay, so this is just a short little piece about House Bill 315, which passed and was signed into law, unfortunately. And one thing that it did was it allowed local police and correctional officers to charge up to $750 for body cam footage per body cam. So if you had 10 officers responding to an incident and they each had a body cam and their cars had body cams, each one of those could be charged up to $750. And so what it does is it starts a process of making information that should be public and available to the public behind a paywall that some people, wouldn't be able to meet. And so, and then again, it's like a domino effect. Well, if they're going to charge for that, are then they going to charge for something else? So this law goes into effect very soon. And this is problematic for families and also for journalists who are trying to get information about what happened in a certain incident for anybody. And some cities, the big three C's in the charge is $75 an hour up to $750 per incident. So per camera. So there's really no top end in terms of how many, if you had a lot of police there, there's really no top end. So the three C's, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, have already said that they will not charge the press for this, for access to body cams. But we are really interested to know if there are other cities, municipalities in Ohio, what they've decided to do. And so we're encouraging people, if you are in other cities across the state, to get in touch with your local police department and ask what their position will be on this topic. And so if you need help, like figuring out, well, who do I contact, et cetera, we're happy, send us an email. We're happy to help. OFUPAC, which is Ohio Families Uniting for Political Action something.
You got it right.
I don't know what the C is, but they are kind of keeping track of what all the different cities are doing. And so if you do make inquiries and you find out, yeah, county sheriffs, exactly. Please let them know. You can let us know. We'll let them know. Don't worry if you don't keep track of that email. But it's just a kind of a local thing that we can do that really has a concrete impact on our ability to see what's going on. OFUPAC, thank you, Bill. All right, I think Catherine, oh no, this is me. So I did see Eleanor is on here. Wave and say hi, Eleanor. I just was so impressed. Eleanor and a group of her friends wrote a letter to the editor that was published in the Chillicothe Gazette, I believe, or correct me if that is not accurate. And just saying, this is who we are. This is what we're concerned about. This is very disturbing to us, what is going on, writing to their senators and their congressmen. And I we will, again, we'll be sending these slides, and this is a segment of the letter that they wrote. And it was published, and they all signed their names, and there they are. And I see a few of them on the call today, and we just wanted to thank you for making the effort. And it's, it's an interesting exercise in kind of civic engagement to get together and to write a letter and to send it to your local paper, and then you can send that around. There's a link there at the bottom. Again, we'll be sending out. We did have to subscribe. It was $1 for 1 month subscription to get the subscription to the paper, but then you have a link and you can make a PDF of it and you can send it around and you can share it on social media. And so we're really encouraging people to do that. And we just wanted to thank the folks that got together to do that. For a lot of them, perhaps the majority of them, this, felt a little uncomfortable, and it was perhaps the first time they'd written a letter to the editor in a public way against something that was happening, on the national scene. But it is really important, because think of all the people that, when they read that and they see all those names and they say, wow, I know that person, that's a reasonable person. And let me think about those concerns and maybe share my own. So we just wanted to thank you for that. Yay. All right. And this is some tips for letter writing. And we also have a link to some social media graphics about the upcoming election. The registration deadline is Monday, April 7th. The primary is on May 6th. So, check out those things as well. And if you ever want help with writing a letter to the editor, just let us know. We're happy to meet with you. And, look at it, make suggestions, etc. Catherine.
So I just wanted to invite you all, if you haven't already decided to RSVP to the Hands Off rallies that are going to be on April 5th. So it's handsoff2025.com. So you can find information there. In the next slide, I also included kind of the mobilize. This gives you a sense of where there are rallies. Now, clearly not all over Ohio, but this came together because of the 50-50-51 folks and all sorts of other organizations saying, hey, we actually need to push back on all of the changes that have been happening. And whether it's pushing back on Musk and Doge, pushing back on executive orders that are power grabs, pushing back so that we can say hands off our Medicare, hands off our Social Security, hands off the Department of Education. This is, a real time for our country. And these are happening not just in Ohio, but all over. On the slide, I it's kind of covered up, but you can see they're just a bunch of different organizations, including, of course, Common Cause. But we also have the Communication Workers of America, all sorts of American Democracy Initiative. There are all sorts of folks that have come together to say, hey, we need to actually do this. And this is just a handful. You can find out a bunch more information on the Hands Off 2025 site. One of the things that I found really exciting had to do with the young people that are part of 50-50-51.
Just 250, 50-51.
They're a new group. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
You know what? Because it was Reddit, it was 50-50-51. It was okay. Never mind. That's what's not important about this. But the name is not as important, and you can figure it anyway. So my apologies.
Sorry.
What I do think is meaningful is that there are folks that have never really taken action. That in fact, the first rallies to push back on Trump didn't come from, big organizations in this country. It came from folks that were on Reddit, folks that are younger, that really wanted to push things along. And, you know, thank you, Jim. Jim has highlighted the actual, anyway, it, it's a bit challenging. Sorry about my extra 5 in there. I think the thing that I guess what I'm trying to say, it feels really meaningful is young people really stepping up and leading the way. So I will be speaking at the rally on April 5th in Cincinnati, and I hope that you can join ones that are near you. And thank you, Bill, for adding the Reddit. I appreciate it.
And we are, there's going to be lots of people at these rallies because, you know, people are upset and they want to show that this is not normal, what's going on is not normal, and they stand against it. So I know in Columbus and in several other areas, we are going to be recruiting marshals to just be helpful and make sure that everything goes off smoothly. I'm going to have a form that I'm going to send around at least to some groups. And folks who marshal will do like a 30-minute training online, and then they'll have like a vest or something. So we will be recruiting marshals. If you're interested in being a marshal and you're going to be in Columbus, please reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. And, you know, because it's always good to have people there who are sensible and, you know, can help answer questions and make sure things go smoothly. And we've reached the end with pretty good timing. We just kind of summarized on this slide all the actions, you know, about the SAVE Act, about the executive order, about the Article 5 convention, our Ohio Voter Rights Coalition. We meet every other Friday. And then there's also a link about the hands-off protests. So I think that's it. I think to answer Michael, I think, you know, we will encourage people not to engage if there are people there who are kind of pushing back, and the marshals and people will be kind of responsible for, you know, making sure that things stay calm. But I would encourage people not to be intimidated, particularly because sometimes people spread stuff on social media like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but you know, nothing much comes of it. So I think it's you know, important that we don't allow threats and bullies to keep us from doing the things that we feel are right to do. Yeah, Felicita, you know, the hands-off rallies are supported by lots of groups: Move On, Common Cause, Indivisible, 5051. And so that's why I think a lot of people will come out. And if there isn't one planned in your neighborhood, the link that we sent does have links for hosting your own. If you want to do one in your area, you definitely can. And we encourage you to do so. So I'm going to take the spotlight off of us in one sec. I think that's what we had to cover. Catherine, anything else?
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and I appreciate your dealing with my tripping over my own tongue, and I'm just really glad that we're all here in this together, thinking about how we can make a difference. I think this is a time period that's rough, you know, and it takes so many of us to make a difference. I had this lovely boss once who would say, we are the leaders we have been waiting for. That it takes all of us, and I think, you know, it takes all of us, and as opposed to waiting for one person, some charismatic person to step up, it's going to take all of us. So we are the leaders we have been waiting for, and I'm just glad that we're all in this together. Any questions
Absolutely.
or final comments that people would like to make, or suggestions for next time?
Thank you guys so much. We We always enjoy this time with you. And when we send out a follow-up, we will have a link to next month's coffee, and you can always send us questions, that you want to be answered and covered. And we appreciate all of you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
See ya.
So glad you joined us.